Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Time once again for another Curating Your Movie Library segment, and unfortunately this time I don't have the blessing of having Lisa with me. I know that's a disappointment to you as it is to me, but it does provide me the opportunity, because I don't like speaking about specific movies without her. So often when I find myself needing to do one of these segments without her, I determine to give you, instead of an overview of a particular movie, a top 5 list. I have given you not too long ago the top 5 superhero movies, and I mentioned therein that I'm not at all a big fan of superhero movies. I sort of feel about superheroes the way I feel about the NFL. I always mention that once the Steelers are eliminated from competition, I don't understand why the season continues, or usually the postseason continues, because for me it's all about the Steelers. I'm not an NFL fan. I'm a Steeler fan. I'm not a superhero fan, but I am a Batman fan. So Batman, I think, ended up taking up 4 out of the 5 slots in our top 5 superhero movies. Well, in the same way, I'm not going to take the position that I'm a radically powerful, strong, compelling, can't stay away from it Western fan, but I did construct a list of the top 5 Western movies. And of course, we have reached an era where Western movies are not quite as common as they once were. Actually, probably not even close to being as common as they once were. And I'm going to start my list with maybe the one Western that symbolized the end of that old era when Westerns were so common. And so number 5 on my top 5 list of Westerns ever made would be The Shootist. And what's fascinating about this movie is it was one of the last roles that Jimmy Stewart took. But that's just a small part of it. It is the last role taken by John Wayne. And there was another young man who was between jobs who had a small role in that movie by the name of Ron Howard. He had finished his chores with the Andy Griffith Show and not yet taken up the chores for Happy Days, and so he was one of the leads in that movie. And it's the story of an older gentleman who once was a quick draw fellow, but now that he's older, he's trying to avoid all of that, but he gets called into one last confrontation and gets to play the hero one last time. It's almost like Rocky 6, if I could describe it as something. It's quite good, though. So that's number 5 on my list of the top 5 Westerns ever made. Number 4 on my list is Butch and Sundance. Now, I'll grant you that is some significant star power with Paul Newman and Robert Redford, but it's a genuinely fun and compelling movie. I enjoyed it as a kid, and it too was sort of in the interim between, or at the end of the old heyday of Western movies. Number 3 on the list, True Grit. Now, I have a confession to make that reveals the fact that I'm not a huge Western fan, and that is this. I never saw the original True Grit. I did see the one, the remake with, is it Jeff Daniels? It's not Jeff Daniels. It's, Jeff Bridges. And, boy, howdy, was it good. I mean, it was like a trip back in time to what Westerns are supposed to be. Number 2 on the list, I'm going to list Unforgiven, again, directed by Clint Eastwood. Morgan Freeman has a role in it. It's just an amazing story about relationships, and all set in the Western genre. Now, before I get to the number 1 film, of course you all know what it's going to be, you know what it has to be, I want to mention a short list of also ran, some honorable mentions, 2 of which were really minor Western-based comedies. One was Shanghai Noon. I really enjoyed Owen Wilson and Jackie Chan together in that. Maverick was another one. 3:10 to Yuma, not a comic movie, but a good one nevertheless. Those 3 would certainly be in my sort of also ran category. But last but not least, Tombstone. I mean, does it ever get any better than that? You have not only probably the greatest performance in a role by anybody, with Val Kilmer playing Doc Holliday. You have, the quintessential cowboy, Sam, that does the commercials with the big bushy beard. I can't remember his last name, but he was just wonderful. Kurt Russell did a great job. It was a beautifully told story. Bit parts, including Billy Bob Thornton. Did you know that Billy Bob Thornton's in there? Yes, he is. Charlton Heston making an appearance. I mean, it was just wonderful. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It is not only the number 1 Western film I believe ever made, it is also in my top 5 movies of any kind ever made. Then you have, in addition to all that, not just the great performance by Val Kilmer, but so many of the great lines that carry through into our day. So that's my list of the top 5 Westerns. I'm not pretending today that this is the be-all and the end-all and the objective standard. It's just where I'm coming through. And again, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and, of course, any commendations for any Westerns that I might have missed that I ought to watch. Oh, I did that to remind me of 2 more old school ones that are sort of comedic on my also ran list: The Cheyenne Social Club and A Big Hand for the Little Lady. In the last week, I've had a couple of conversations that I want to share briefly with you. One of those conversations was with someone I'd never met before. He is a father. He is a breadwinner for his family, his homeschooling family, and he is a leader in his local church who is also pursuing advanced studies, pursuing a Doctor of Theology degree. And he contacted me because in the program that he's involved in, every student has a kind of academic advisor, a ministerial advisor, and a personal advisor. The academic advisor is in charge of his studies, the ministerial advisor in charge of how those studies impact his work in the church, and the personal is in charge of how his studies are impacting him as a Christian himself. Well, this fellow was calling me thinking I might be a good candidate to serve in that last role. And we had a good talk about it. In the course of that conversation, I mentioned something that I mentioned in the other conversation. That conversation was with a man I actually know who's been a friend and for several years now, and who is a supporter of the work of Dunamis Fellowship. We were talking about our hopes and our dreams with respect to training men for gospel ministry. And I said to him what I said to this other fellow. I said, when you go to seminary, they teach you the Bible well enough that you should be able to discern that the Bible says nothing whatsoever about seminaries. You track with that? If you go to seminary, you should learn the Bible well enough to know that the Bible says nothing whatsoever about seminaries. And yet, for so much of the evangelical church, a seminary education is deemed to be an essential part of preparation for gospel ministry. Well, I don't think it should be. That doesn't mean I believe in an uneducated clergy. It doesn't mean I don't think there are things worth teaching. It does mean that God didn't design graduate school to be the place where you get those things. Well, that is a part of our vision and our dream, to build a something closer to a discipleship model of training men for gospel ministry, because we're convinced that the issues that are called for in a pastor are character issues. My own brother-in-law, Lisa's husband, is a kind man. He's a gentle man, and a dear, dear man. And he has worked and labored in the denomination that he's a part of to get to the place where he could be ordained, and he is ordained. And he had classes, and there's some academic rigor to it, but it's not a seminary degree. But I would much rather have him as my pastor, well, than most of the people I went to seminary with. Not all of them, but most of them. We're wanting to get closer to what the Bible shows us. Now, that doesn't make us anti-technology either, by the way. We're communicating to you through a podcast. And one of the things that I'm contemplating doing is recording on video a teaching series on how to prepare a sermon, about the process, about the goal, and getting that out there and being a help to those who never learn these things, who don't know these things, and who could use these things. Now, this is not a stylistic thing where I tell people, move your hand this way when you make this point, or, when you have a weak point, yell really loud. That's not the point. The point is to help people realize how to present a good, sound, biblical exposition and preaching of the text. There are many, many things, many weaknesses in the contemporary evangelical church with respect to preaching, and really many extremes on either side of the pendulum. That is, we have tiny little faithful churches where we get lectures from a scholar, and then we have great big happy clappy churches where we get pep talks from a cheerleader. Well, both of those are important elements of what a good sermon is. Exhortation and cheerleading are not that far off. And scholarship and teaching are not that far off. So we want to be about the business of equipping people and providing for them those tools which can help them feed their sheep more fully. Well, why do I mention all this? Well, because this is that time each week in the Jesus Changes Everything podcast where we remind you that we are in seek of partners. We're looking for people who want to get behind us, like the fellow that I talked to earlier this week. People who share this vision, this sense of, hey, there's something wrong in the evangelical church, and what we need is, among other things, faithful, biblical preaching that's grounded in and wrapped up in the resurrection power of Jesus. We want to help bring that to pass, and we need your help to do that. Would you please prayerfully consider supporting the work of Dunamis Fellowship? As always, it's simple. rcsproul.jr.com, S-P-R-O-U-L, rcsproul.jr.com. There's a donate button right there on the home page, and it'll walk you through the whole process. Thank you again for listening. He was at least an insightful man, if not a wise man, who first said, "I care not who writes a nation's laws, as long as I write the nation's songs." This fellow understood that what shapes our lives is rather more potent than that which merely hedges our lives. We are at least obtuse men, if not foolish men, when we labor so hard to seize the engines of political power for the sake of the kingdom. It is a good thing that we aspire to see every knee bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. His reign indeed covers all things political. But it is a bad thing that we would rather see his lordship confessed in a courtroom than in song. While we rightly affirm that man is soul and body, not, as we too often think, souls in bodies, we would be wrong to pass over the remaining distinction between mind and heart. We are two things, the material and the immaterial. And that which is immaterial is at least two things, what we think and what we feel. A man of integrity has mind and heart in harmony. Few of us are there, however. Excitement, more often than not, is a function of the heart more than the mind. As we consider the law, usually our minds are more engaged than our hearts. It is a rare bird indeed whose nerves begin to twitter when he hears "In re Carlton versus the state of Nevada," or "Whereas the charter of the town of Lysippus gives license to all who live therein to..." Music, on the other hand, has charms. Music has the unique ability to bring together heart and mind, to both teach and inspire at the same time. It, more than abstract arguments, more than abstract law, shapes souls. We are what we sing, which is why he who is wisdom wisely gave us songs. One of the weaknesses of the loss of psalm singing in the church is that we have lost sight of the power of psalms as song. We know that the Psalms are God's Word. We know that they contain wisdom. We may even read and study them in an attempt to internalize the wisdom that they contain. They become fodder for sermons, proof texts for sundry theological positions. But that's not the way God intended us to be shaped by the Psalms. He wrote them so that we would sing them. This doesn't mean, of course, that this is all we might sing. Sadly, however, too many of us who conclude we may sing songs that are not psalms don't take the trouble to sing the psalms. We seem to think our only choices are psalms only or no psalms at all. Singing the psalms moves their wisdom from our brains into our hearts. And our hearts are the font of our actions, our lives. It seems even the world is beginning to figure this out. A recent study, apparently sponsored by the Institute for the Incredibly Obvious, demonstrated that the more teenagers are exposed to sexually explicit media, whether it be television, video games, movies, or music, the more likely they were to engage in sexual behavior at an earlier age. The world has not yet passed laws requiring teenagers to be sexually active. While we're busy creating political action committees to keep condoms out of our schools, while we push for abstinence training in our schools, our earbuds are telling us, and forgive the anachronism, that we feel like making love, that what we need is sexual healing. The earbuds win every time. If we who serve Christ sing his songs, the songs of wisdom, and the world outside the church sings songs of folly, what we would expect is different worlds. We should expect our lives to be marked by wisdom, by fidelity, by godliness. What we find, again, according to sundry studies, is that evangelicals, both unmarried young people and married adults, are roughly as likely to be fornicators or adulterers as their unbelieving counterparts. The reason is likely this: we don't listen to the music of wisdom, but instead listen to the music of the world. Our ears are as plugged into folly as the ears of our neighbors. James Adams, in his fine book War Psalms of the Prince of Peace, affirms that the Psalms, however a rich source they might be on the life of David, exist first to tell us the story of Jesus. The Psalms cover the gamut of human experience. You will find there triumph and defeat, confidence and uncertainty, joy and despair. It's because these things tell us the story of Jesus, however, that they are songs of wisdom. As these songs indwell us, as they shape not just our thinking, but our feeling, we will become more like Jesus, who is the very personification of wisdom. As these songs proceed from our lips, we not only speak wisdom, but speak Jesus, showing forth his glory. We ought to be distinct from the world around us. We are called to be a set-apart people. Perhaps by his grace we might become distinct if we would sing an old song to the Lord, if we would sing the Lord's songs to the Lord, if we would sing wisdom, perhaps wisdom might bless us.